I'm really happy with the way that this stitching pony turned out. The link is up above. It allows you to rotate it on the base. For instance, when it's positioned this way, you can keep the base underneath your thighs and sit down and stitch your piece of leather saddle stitch. Or you can twist it and rotate it and clamp it on your workbench or your desk. It clamps onto the piece that you're stitching extremely well. It holds it. The grip is excellent. However, there's a few items which I'm not too happy about. First of all, this depth is not deep enough. I quite often find when I'm stitching a piece of leather that I need that it hits the bar here or it hits the bolt. So I need more depth. The second item, which I'm not too happy about, is I don't have enough room to tighten this knob. I mean, we're getting a little bit picky here, but you know, the third item is really picky. I really like the profile. However, and the corner doesn't get in your way of when you're doing a saddle stitch, for instance. However, you are cognizant, you're aware that the corner is there, and you do try to keep your fingers away from it. So I'm going to make another version. It's going to be V2.0, version 2.0. It's going to be new and improved. I'm not going to use the plywood. I'm going to be using this vintage box that I had. It is pine, but I'll get to that. Also, I think I'm going to keep this base how it was rectangle here. I want to make it circular, and I want to keep the knob on the outside. So those are the ideas that I have in my mind. So we'll see where it takes us. That's next. The first step is to decide which material we're going to make this stitching pony out of. I had originally thought, or what I wanted to do, was utilize this old box which I picked up at a flea market. I really liked the old, aged, vintage look of it. But then I looked at it and I go, well, this is pine. Why don't I try to use a new piece of pine? So here's a new piece. You see that there's strips of pine glued together. I said, well, that doesn't do because this box looks like one solid piece. But then the arms of the stitching pony is only 3.5 inches wide anyway, so it wouldn't make a difference. But in the end, I decided to go with this old vintagey box, or we'll call it reclaimed wood. So I'm going to use this. I took meticulous care in disassembling the box to avoid damaging any of the wood. Here I am applying a few stains that I have to an old scrap piece of wood. What I want to do is try to match the old color or the stain as closely as possible. Here we have a red mahogany. I'm also using chestnut or English chestnut. I have a dark walnut, and I have a couple which I'm not even going to really bother with. It's a burgundy red and an espresso, which aren't going to work anyway. So I'm going to apply a little bit of each of these colors onto a test piece of wood. I'll take it out to garage to dry. While the test piece is drying, we're going to cut out the base, which is going to hold the arms. It's going to be circular, about 7 inches in diameter. I am going to be using my router to cut it out. I will apply two-sided tape. As you'll see, the two-sided tape didn't really hold that well. I did my best, and in the end, it worked. So the stains are fairly dry. It looks like that middle selection English chestnut is going to be the stain that I'll be using. So I used one of the sides of the boxes for the arms. The other side of the box, the long piece, will be used for the base. Here I am, I'm just positioning the base or the platform on top of the base just to see where I want the cuts. I'm just measuring and I'm drawing some lines, and I'll take it over to the bandsaw to cut out the base. Once it's cut out on the bandsaw, I'll just take a file and some sandpaper just to shape it properly and to smooth out the edges. So it's a good fit. That platform, the round circular platform, sits perfectly on the base. You see here that I'll be using a connector bolt and cap to attach the platform to the base. I'm taking the old stitching pony apart. I'm going to utilize a couple of the parts, such as the clamp with the spring and the door hinge. I'll be using that. I'll be using the same setup basically. I'm taking the pieces for the arms and the jaw out to the garage to cut them on a 45-degree angle, and we'll be right back. As you can see, this wood is old, it's dried out, and sometimes this happens when you're using a chop saw, just snap in half. But luckily I had a few extra pieces laying around, or I had some extra wood laying around, so I recut the jaw. You can use any type of leather for the grip on the claws. I'm using Vegetan leather here. I cut it out roughly to size. I'm going to use contact cement to glue it onto the claws, and then I'll trim the edges afterwards. Next, I stained all the pieces before I glued them up. And once they have dried, I applied a few coats of polyurethane. At this point, I've stained it and I've aged it a bit by just sanding the edges. I've added a couple of coats of polyurethane. The next step is putting it all together. Once the polyurethane had dried, I sanded off the areas that are going to be glued together. I attached the jaws to the arms. I glued them up. I clamped them up. And next, we're working on a section which is really scaring the bejesus out of me. If I screw this one up, I'm not going to have enough wood to make another piece. What I'm doing here is I'm putting a little slot or a groove in that platform, that round 7-inch platform, to be able to rotate it. So I want a 45-degree curve, a groove, into which I will thread a knob, which will go into a T-bolt or a T-nut from underneath. Didn't explain that very well, but you'll see what I mean. So I'm extremely happy with that turned out. Worked out perfect. It looks good. And I guess we're all ready and set to put everything together. If I center the stitching pony on the base here, it's going to, the hinge of the door is going to stick out a bit here. So I can either choose to shift it over to the left or grind down the door hinge or just round it off a bit. I'm going to choose to round it off here on the grinder. I'm just using a DIY bench grinder. The link is up above. I need a new wheel. So soft. Here I'm cutting a groove into the wood for the round part or the ends of the hinges. I'm using cheap woodworking tools that I got off one of the Chinese sites. They're crap, but it's working. The arm attached to the hinge isn't sitting perpendicular to the base. I attribute that to the unevenness of the base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand down the base of the arm onto an angle just so it'll tilt inwards more. Okay, now we need to drill a hole. Or how did we have it here? We just put a hole here like that, right? I'm very, very pleased with the way this turned out. I've addressed the 3 areas of concern which I had. Number 1 being the height, depth, or the clearance. I've increased it by 5 inches, which is now sitting at 11 inches. I really had less than 6 inches clearance before. Second area was this angle here. Before there was a vertical piece, even though it looked nice, this is going to work better. And thirdly, the knob in the middle was not easy to access, to turn, to pivot. We've added the knob here. You can quickly turn it, keep this on the workbench, clamp it onto the workbench and work. Or if you want to be sitting with this underneath your thighs, undo the knob, turn it over, turn it around, and tighten it again. So happy. I was going to change the knob here to the same color. However, my daughter, she was 4 at the time, she painted this. So I'm going to keep that. Much more valuable to me than having a knob with the same color. But, you know, it's a preference. I wanted to keep it a vintage look. It's got that vintage look. I mean, it's not as sturdy as the plywood, but, you know, I'm very happy. I had a little bit of a concern that this was a little bit too low, but it seems to be nice and tight here. So happy with the way it turned out. Tell me what you think. Leave your comments below. Do you have any ways where I could have improved this? Do you have any other ideas which could have been incorporated here? Let me know what you think. Until next time, thanks for joining, guys. We'll see you later.